I'm Byron Brown. Tonight on Mississippi Insight, the battle for Lieutenant Governor. Delbert Hoseman and Jay Hughes debate in our studio, and our experts break it down. Also, the race for governor and the potential impact of Jim Hood's report on Tate Reeves. Plus, we're looking ahead to 2020. Mike Espy weighs in another battle with Cindy Hyde-Smith. But first, the 2020 ballot could include a question on legalizing medical marijuana. And welcome back. The push to legalize medical marijuana in Mississippi gets a big boost this week. A group pushing to get the issue on the ballot turns in more than 100,000 signatures. If it's all certified by the state, that issue could go on the ballot in 2020. Well, to talk about it, we're joined by Jamie Grantham with Medical Marijuana 2020. And Jamie, these signatures must be certified again by the state, but they are been by the clerk's offices. It kind of explain that process and how it all works.
Absolutely. So we spent the last 12 months gathering signatures across the whole state of Mississippi, and those signatures were turned into circuit clerk's offices in all 82 counties. And the circuit clerks would check the signatures to make sure that those signatures were registered Mississippi voters. And so we turned in all of those signatures to the Secretary of State's office last Wednesday. And so the Secretary of State's office is now in the process of reviewing what we turned in and confirming that those are certified so that we can qualify to be on the November 2020 ballot next year. And
so once that happens and it gets turned into and the state qualifies those, it goes on the ballot in November 2020. What happens if voters decide, yes, we want medical marijuana?
Then Mississippi will get a medical marijuana program. The program will be implemented by August of 2021. That's written into the amendment. And the Department of Health will be the regulatory agency that will write all of the rules and regs for that, will oversee the licensing for the medical marijuana businesses, will oversee the medical marijuana identification cards that go out to the patients. They'll oversee the whole program. And of course it goes through Mississippi licensed physicians. So if you're a patient who has a debilitating medical condition that would qualify you per the initiative, you would go to see your physician as you would for any other condition that you would need to be examined for, and then they could write a certification for you for medical marijuana.
Talk about some of the conditions that you all are wanting to target with medical marijuana.
So this amendment was written specifically for people who are suffering from debilitating medical conditions. It doesn't include anything like a stubbed toe or a headache or anything like that. It's for people who suffer from things like Huntington's disease, Parkinson's disease, epilepsy, cancer, sickle cell anemia, spinal cord injury, spinal cord disease, and those kinds of things. And a lot of people who have some of those conditions, they've tried a lot of pharmaceutical treatments, and they have not been effective in alleviating their symptoms. And medical marijuana they have programs in over 33 other states across the U.S. And so we want Mississippians who suffer from those conditions to have the same access.
What is polling showing you? How do you think Mississippians would vote on this issue?
Polling shows that 77% of Mississippians are in favor of a strictly regulated medical marijuana program through physicians and through the Department of Health.
There's a lot of critics are saying this could lead to a slippery slope. You go medical marijuana, then now we're going to have a pot going on here, recreational pot going, and we're going to turn it into Colorado or something. What's your response to those who are against this process?
That I hear that concern. That's a valid question. It doesn't really work that way. For Mississippi, we are only talking about a medical initiative for patients who are suffering from debilitating medical conditions. Only 10 other states have gone further. 10 other states that have medical programs have gone further to implement anything beyond that as far as recreational use, but that has nothing to do with what we're trying to implement here. And specifically for Mississippi, Mississippi is a very red, very conservative, very religious state. And so in order to, if somebody wanted to do something like that, they would have to go through an entire other ballot initiative to do something like that.
If this gets on the ballot, what do you think voters are going to do, or what's the questions going to be that voters may have as they go in to make that decision?
The question that's going to be on the ballot is, should Mississippi allow qualified patients with debilitating medical conditions as certified by Mississippi licensed physicians to use medical marijuana? That'll be the question on the ballot. So anyone who goes in to vote would scroll to the very bottom of the ballot, and they would see that question there that they could vote yes or no on. And The proposal is actually on our website, medicalmarijuana2020.com, and it's a very well-written proposal with a lot packed in it, and so that's on there for anybody to read as far as what that would look like.
Yeah, a lot of it started with Ashley Duvall and her daughter who's
Yes.
been suffering from this, kind of getting this going on. How important was it, I guess, to get with her and her story about this, who has epilepsy and everything else that you're dealing with this?
Well, Ashley Duvall is the mom of Harper Grace Duvall, and Ashley is actually, she's on our steering committee. You know, we have a steering committee of over 70 different doctors and other healthcare professionals, leaders in the community, religious leaders, law enforcement veterans. That's on our website as well. But Ashley's on our steering committee, and not only is she on our steering committee, but she's who filed this initiative with the Secretary of State. And her interest in this is her daughter, Harper Grace. And the story there is that Harper Grace began having very severe, very long seizures for most of the day when she was about 6 months old. And after a series of testing and trying to figure out what was wrong with her daughter was diagnosed with a rare form of epilepsy called Dravet syndrome. And so when Harper Grace was 2 years old, a bill was signed into law by Governor Bryant, and it's named after Harper Grace. It's called Harper Grace's Law. And that bill was intended to allow Harper Grace and other people with the same form of epilepsy to have access to CBD oil. And as you may know, CBD is one of the many cannabinoids found in the marijuana plant. And Harper Grace, that was signed into law when she was 2. She's now 7 years old, and she's never received a drop of the medication. And so what Medical Marijuana 2020 would do, if this is passed in November 2020, this would not only allow Harper Grace and other people with that debilitating condition access to CBD, but it would allow people with some of the other conditions we mentioned, like cancer and Parkinson's disease and spinal cord disease, and the other ones listed in the initiative. It would allow them access not only to CBD, but to the other cannabinoids found in the marijuana plant as well. I am so excited and thankful that we have these signatures. It was a massive effort over the last 12 months, and there was just overwhelming support, gathering signatures from all over the state of Mississippi. We had to gather it in the old 5 congressional districts as of 2000. And so all of those conversations, I would say, are just right in line with what the polling is, which is the 77%, and that's across political affiliations, religious affiliations, age, you name it. People understand that this really helps people, and oftentimes it's patients with that have tried pharmaceutical medications and they have not been helpful to them.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jamie Grantham, very much. Thank you very much. And we'll be right back.
We shouldn't be having your death sentence on someone that's got a treatable condition. And these are people that are paying their part. They're working people.
It's a $6 billion decision. I don't need to make it laissez-faire. I want to make sure that we do it right the first time. We will look at expanding our health care to cover everybody and cut the cost down.
Well, Secretary of State Delbert Hosemann and Representative Jay Hughes go head-to-head in our studio, and the first and so far only debate in the lieutenant governor's race. Afterwards, I spoke with 2 political analysts to see who has the edge. I'm here with Adam Ganucheau and Alan Lange, and we're talking about the lieutenant governor's race and the debate. Now, we'll start with you, Alan. Kind of get your thoughts on how they did on Thursday night and what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think, both candidates came in with kind of different objectives. Hosemann wanting to just kind of associate himself with people of the state of Mississippi. He's been elected 3 times for statewide office. So I think his main goal was to roll out some new policy proposals to kind of be fresh on people's minds. I think Hughes had an opportunity to visit with some Mississippians for the first time. He's a first-time statewide legislator, or first-time state legislator from Oxford, and so he didn't quite have the name ID. So this was an opportunity for him to break out in a way and at least, try to connect his message of what he's trying to tell people in Mississippi.
They didn't sound that far apart on a lot of the issues. although they articulate what they want to do. Was that a surprise to you?
A little bit. You know, I mean, I don't think there's a huge disagreement on kind of what the issues are, whether it's health care or roads and bridges or teacher pay. I think both Republicans and Democrats, generally kind of want the same thing. It's a question of how do you get there, right? From a revenue perspective, raising taxes, cutting taxes, whatever you have to do to get there. I think that's the issue that ultimately they'll probably diverge some on, and I think that's what will be litigated in the course of the campaign.
Right. Adam, what did you hear, and what were you hoping to hear?
Well, I wasn't necessarily hoping to hear anything, but I was sort of expecting them to go at each other a little bit more than they did. Like y'all just said, that it was they did present a lot of the same policy proposals, at least the same ideas. They differentiated slightly on how they might want to, solve those problems and infrastructure, education, and healthcare in particular. But really, I thought that, like Alan said, Jay Hughes, I think his objective today was to introduce himself to voters and to really try to build up that name ID. And I wonder if just because, he didn't necessarily differentiate himself a ton on policy from Hosemann, I wonder if that might hurt him come November.
What do you think the biggest issue was tonight, and what do you think most Mississippians wanted to hear?
Delbert Hosemann said his first priority would be increasing teacher salaries. That's, of course, been Jay Hughes's MO really for the last 2-3 years is funding public education and giving teachers higher salaries. I wondered also about infrastructure. Of course, I think no matter where you are racially, socioeconomically, or regionally, everyone in Mississippi has had to drive on similar roads and bridges. They have been deteriorating really across the state. You heard both of these candidates, both the Republican and the Democrat, talk about the possibility of increasing the gasoline tax. Delbert Hosemann, for the first time, rolled out this notion of letting cities and counties decide for themselves whether or not they wanted to increase the taxes in that county. And you had Jay Hughes, who would not discount the notion of considering an increase in the gas tax. So I think on those two main issues, that's probably what Mississippians might have been most tuned into, and of course, health care. But it was interesting to see.
Yeah. When it comes to the gas tax, I mean, Delbert Hosemann kind of broke down his plan. Do you think that would work, kind of giving it back to the counties? Well,
I think he's going to be litigating that, with voters over the course of the next few months. And, I think it's possible that it can work. I think that in some counties that they might want that. I think from a statewide perspective, it's difficult. I think it's really kind of almost becomes an economic development issue too. And companies start looking at, hey, is this going to increase our cost? Is this going to change how we serve customers and individual customers? Does this affect my pocketbook? Does this affect how I get, if I commute 30 or 50 or 70 miles a day? What does that do to my pocketbook? So I think, there's going to be a lot that's going to be talked about here, over the next few months, and we'll see what voters decide.
Well, what do you think they have to do going forward? What's Mr. Hosemann have to do going forward?
Well, again, I think, Delbert Hosemann, having been elected statewide 3 times and had been generally popular, I think he's going to just try to run his process. I think he's going to he's been elected statewide. He's going to focus more on the blocking and tackling. I think Jay Hughes is going to have to kind of create a stir. I think he's going to have to break out. I think he's going to have to create, a whole lot of activity to get voters to notice him and earn media and so on and so forth, because I don't think money is going to be a differentiator in this race. I think both candidates, I think Jay Hughes has put in a lot of his own money. I think Delbert Hosemann is very well funded, and so I think at the end of the day, it's just going to come down to kind of what their process is, what their message is.
Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves is pushing back on an explosive AG report that says Reeves and his office improperly pushed a frontage road project near his neighborhood. 12 News' Gerald Harris was there when Reeves addressed the issue at the Capitol.
Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves is slamming this report produced by Attorney General and Democratic candidate for Governor Jim Hood, saying it's full of deceit.
Candidate Jim Hood asked Attorney General Jim Hood to help candidate Jim Hood become Governor Jim Hood.
The report found Reeves improperly sought to influence a road building project near Reeves's neighborhood. Reeves denies the findings.
There was nothing new in this report that came out, nothing at all that was new. In fact, if there was anything that was new that came out, it was the fact that Attorney General Jim Hood has said that this is over.
Reeves also said there was no documents from his office to hand over to the AG concerning the project. Hood said that's not true. His campaign lists 22 communications surrounding the projects, saying a cover-up and lies can't hide the facts. Tate Reeves applied political pressure to build a private access road near his home at taxpayer expense. Come clean, release all the correspondence. Reeves responded.
Well, we did provide him all the information that he asked for, and the reality is that there was nothing there. And the reason there was nothing there is because I wasn't involved.
Reeves did not answer repeated follow-up questions to clarify if he provided documents to Hood's office to complete the investigation with his likely testimony. In Jackson, Gerald Harris, 12 News.
When we come back, more with our political experts, Adam Ganucheau and Alan Lange, on the impact of the AG's report and a Senate race sequel may be taking shape. Welcome back. More on that report heating up the race for Mississippi governor. Jim Hood accusing Tate Reeves of a cover-up. Reeves says Hood is playing a political dirty trick. More with our political experts, y'all Politics' Alan Lange and Mississippi Today's Adam Ganucheau. All right, let's talk a little bit about the governor's race here. Tate Reeves is hitting back now that after Attorney General Hood released this report. What do you think about the Reeves response to Jim Hood?
Look, I think this report on the frontage road, this is an investigation that was going on for just under 14 months. It's been sort of, as I've been calling it, the fox lurking in the shadows. I mean, this has been on both sides something that voters have been wondering, when is the shoe going to drop? So when it dropped this week, we got strong reactions from both sides. Of course, today, Thursday, Reeves released his full response. I think he gave a quick initial one on Wednesday evening, but the big one was, I did nothing here. And it wasn't just I did nothing here. He's trying to turn it back on Jim Hood. He sent a press release to every reporter in the state with a list of questions that I think was literally was labeled questions that Jim Hood should be asked about this process. So he's invoking the names of people like James Comey and Hillary Clinton. He's really trying to make this sort of about the political stunt, as he's calling it, Hood investigating and then dropping this report, and we'll see how voters respond to that.
Yeah. And what's your reaction to what's going on with this frontage road?
I think it's a lot of politics right now. Lucian Smith, who's the head of the GOP, on Wednesday called it Mississippi's Mueller report, which is obviously a throwback to kind of the national effort against Donald Trump, and I think that's probably kind of where the Reeves camp is ultimately going to kind of wind up in this. It's an interesting deal. Justice Chandler, who former Supreme Court justice that Jim Hood brought in to author an opinion. It wasn't really an opinion, but it was, this investigative report was, kind of didn't have much more binding authority than my son's term paper. It wasn't an indictment. It wasn't anything like that. But, Justice Chandler, evaluated the issues and really came out. There's a section 109 of the Constitution that talks about, that public officials can't have a direct financial impact on things that they are involved in. And he really scrubbed down the four tenets of that section of law and basically came to the conclusion that there wasn't much there. And I think the other issue is that, here we are 7 weeks out from the election campaign. You had the optics of the state's attorney general, essentially, quote unquote, prosecuting his political opponent, of really which he had some financial interest in the outcome. In other words, if he had said, well, hey, I'm going to indict, or I'm going to do something, to my opponent, there's almost a direct financial, input there. So I think actually, in a way, both candidates are probably glad this is kind of off the, that this bomb has gone off, it's exploded, and now I think everybody's going to get back to business.
Right. Another issue of politics, Mike Espy tweeting out that he's looking to raise a little bit of money to consider a run for Senate in 2020. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about, the interesting thing is with 2020 and the federal election, primary day is going to be in March, which is just compresses everything into this U.S. Senate campaign is going to be partially run down the home stretch of a statewide election. And so, if either party has challengers for Republicans, for a challenger to Cindy Hyde-Smith, or if any other Democrats, challenge Mike Espy, if in fact he does throw his hat back in the ring, as it looks like he probably will, those campaigns are going to start getting litigated, kind of right before, on, or right after Election Day.
The news this week, that he's now raising money and he's really making an effort to sort of get his name back out there is fascinating. Look, last year, 2018, I thought the time was, if there was ever a time for a Democrat in Mississippi to win the U.S. Senate seat in the modern era, 2018, the time was ripe. You had a lot of confrontation and conflict with President Trump and liberals across the country, not just here in Mississippi, questioning whether his leadership was sufficient enough. You heard a lot of pontificating ahead of time about a so-called blue wave across the country. Mike Espy had that name ID. He was known by voters, dating back to his time in federal government in the 90s. And, he also faced an appointed candidate who had never run for U.S. Senate before, in Cindy Hyde-Smith, who certainly made it, I think, a little bit easier for Espy to throw some punches, especially late. But he still lost by, 8 points, I think. So, I'm interested to watch this. I think anytime you have a name like Mike Espy in a U.S. Senate race especially, I think he's going to garner some attention, not just from across the state of Mississippi, but also from some national media and political analysts as well. We'll see if he has enough this time, if he does end up running.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you. Sure. And we'll be right back. Thanks for joining us. For Gerald Harris, I'm Byron Brown. We'll see you next Saturday night. Make it a good night.